The school bus that mysteriously disappeared. In 1976 in Chowchilla, California, 26 children between the ages of 5 and 14 were on their way home on the school bus when they were kidnapped along with the driver. Frederick Newhall Woods and brothers James and Richard Schoenfeld came up with an evil plan because they didn't have much money. The school bus left at the same usual time, but on the way, a van pulled up in front of them, and inside were the 3 men with masks and guns. Once they got control of the bus, they drove for about 12 hours to a quarry 100 miles from Chowchilla. When they arrived, the kidnappers took out the hostages one by one and told them to climb down a ladder that apparently led to a buried trailer. They didn't have good ventilation, so they were suffocating. And after 16 hours, the bus driver and the older boys piled up mattresses to get to the only place out, then moved a metal lid the kidnappers had placed and dug to the surface, managing to get out from underground. When they got to the surface, the 3 men were sleeping, so it was an easy escape. And 2 weeks after the kidnapping, the 3 men were arrested. This man has the longest nails in the world. Sridhar Shalal stopped cutting the nails on his left hand in 1952 when he was just 14 years old. His longest nail was on his thumb, measuring 197.8 centimeters long. In 2014, he got a Guinness World Record for having the longest nails in history on a single hand, with a total length of 909.6 centimeters. Having such long nails has been rewarding for him because of all the recognition he gets, but has also brought him a lot of negative consequences because of the weight and length of the nails. For example, he has a permanent disability of his left hand and a lot of pain in his fingers, wrist, elbow, and shoulder. But in July 2018, after 66 years without cutting his nails, he decided it was time to do it. They couldn't cut them with traditional nail clippers, so they had to use power tools. Now his nails are displayed in 2 different locations. 3 of them are at Ripley's Believe It or Not in New York, and the other 2 are at Ripley's Believe It or Not in Amsterdam. Disney closed this water park, and the reason why is scary. In 1976, Disney opened its first water park called Country River. It was one of the most popular attractions at Disney World because it had lots of water rides with slides, rivers, and a lake with a sandy bottom. Since it was located in Bay Lake, Florida, it had a unique water filtration system which kept the water clean. But in 2001, the park mysteriously closed, disappointing a lot of people. Disney announced that it was due to remodeling, but years went by and it never reopened. And in 2005, they announced that it would remain closed permanently because they didn't have many visitors. Many people weren't convinced with this explanation because there were still tons of people going there. Instead, they believe the reason is due to several fatal accidents that happened over the years. One of them was an 8-year-old boy who was enjoying a ride. An amoeba from the water got in his body through his nose, and it attacked his nervous system, which ended up killing him. How KFC was made from a gas station recipe. When Harlan Sanders was 6 years old, his father passed away, so his mother had to work while he took care of his siblings. In 1930, he got offered a job at the Shell Oil Company to manage a gas station. He quickly got the idea to make more money by making food for drivers passing through the gas station. His food, especially his fried chicken, became very famous. He came up with a technique to reduce the cooking time of the chicken, and also experimented with different spices until he got the flavor that he wanted. He then called it the secret blend of 11 herbs and spices. In 1950, he had to sell his place because of the construction of a new highway, which decreased his customers, which decreased his sales, leaving him in debt. After this, he got the great idea to create the franchise Kentucky Fried Chicken. He drove around the country selling his recipe and preparation technique to different companies in exchange for 4 cents per 1 chicken sold. By 1963, there were more than 600 franchises throughout United States and Canada. And finally, when he was 73 years old, he sold his franchise to an investment group for what would be over $14 million today. This 6-year-old boy became the youngest soldier in World War II. Sergei Aleshkov, a 6-year-old boy, was orphaned during World War II after German troops arrived and killed everyone in his village, including his mother and brother. Sergei managed to escape with the help of a neighbor and quickly ran into the forest. After a few days, he was found by Soviet scouts who took him to a shelter led by Major Kozelski. Kozelski decided to leave him with the battle troops, and he was soon adopted by Mikhail Vorobyov, who didn't want to send him to an orphanage. Sergei didn't take part in combat operations. Instead, he had tasks like delivering letters and newspapers. He also brought the soldiers whatever they needed, including water, ammo, and grenades. But one of the times he went to deliver the newspaper, he saw suspicious people in a haystack and informed the artillery commander. The people turned out to be German spies who were then neutralized. After the war, Vorobyov raised Sergei, who later got married, had 2 children, and passed away in 1990. Secret Places Hidden in Famous Locations Part 2. In the Statue of Liberty, there's a small room located inside the torch, but no one can enter it because that part was damaged by the Germans in 1916. And although it was prepared, they don't allow people in it as a safety precaution. Mount Rushmore is famous for the 4 sculpted faces of previous American presidents, but behind them is a secret vault. Inside are different historical documents, like the Declaration of Independence, the biography of the sculptor, and the history of the construction of the place, but no one can access them. Inside Big Ben, there's a hidden room by the bell tower, and although it's no longer in use, it used to be used as a prison for people who breached the code of conduct. The Tower of London is one of the most famous fortresses in the world and home to the Yeoman Warders. And underneath it there's a pub that you can only enter if you were invited by one of them. Gadgets that give you superpowers. MYO is a bracelet made by Telmic Labs. It allows you to control your electronics with simple gestures. The sensors detect the movements in your arm muscles, and some of its functions are you can control the volume of your music, you can control drones, and you could also play games without the joystick. If you've ever wanted to throw fire with your hands, you can with the Pyro Mini Flamethrower. You put it on your wrist and it lets you throw sparks, flames, and fireballs. It does this by quickly burning tissue. The exoskeleton is a full bodysuit. It has integrated weapons, it's bulletproof, it increases your mobility and strength by taking the stress off your joints and muscles, which even allows people in wheelchairs to stand up and walk. The scariest coincidence is caught on camera. In Pennsylvania, a body was found by the police in a river while reporters surrounded the area trying to figure out what was happening. One of the reporters interviewed a man named Matthew that lived by the area. When she asked him about the situation, he seemed really surprised and said that he had no idea what had happened. He said it was sad and a good place to hide a body. A few hours later, the police discovered that the body was Matthew's mother. He was later arrested after the police found out that he was in possession of the same tarp that the body was wrapped up in. He was then sentenced to 14 years in prison. The event that started World War I was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand from Austria, which took place when he was being driven away in a limousine. The most disturbing coincidence was the license plate. The license plate number was A111118, which could also be read as November 11th, 1918, which is the date that World War I was agreed on. The happiest prisoner on death row. Joe Arity was born in 1915 in Colorado. He eventually entered the state training and home school for the mentally handicapped at the age of 10. At the age of 21, he left school and boarded a freight car, and ended up in Wyoming. At the same time, the police were on the lookout for a person guilty of murder and attempted murder on the two sisters, Dorothy and Barbara Drain. While Joe was wandering around, he was stopped by the sheriff George Carroll, who thought he was a suspect in the crime. After questioning him, the sheriff said he confessed to the crimes and was arrested. Then Frank Aguilar, who worked for the Drain family, confessed to the crime. Barbara, who was the survivor of the attack, confirmed that it was Frank and said that she had never seen Joe. Joe's lawyer tried to obtain a plea of insanity because 3 psychiatrists said that he had an IQ of 46 and the mind of a 6-year-old. Despite this, Joe was wrongfully sentenced to death, and everyone who saw him in jail said that he kept smiling. On the day of his execution, he still couldn't understand what was going on and still had a smile on his face as he entered the gas chamber. Why North Korea is the hardest country to escape. Since Kim Jong-un took power in North Korea, it's become harder and harder to cross the North Korean border. When his father was in charge, the number of people who crossed the border was higher because the border security was less tight. They could simply bribe the local border control and they would let them pass into China. But when Kim Jong-un realized this, he decided to tighten the security. And now the border patrol can shoot anyone that tries to cross the border. He also had an electric barbed wire fence installed across the border. There's lots of escape routes, but they're all really dangerous. If anyone manages to reach China, they'll have to stay in hiding because if they're found by the authorities, they'll be sent back to North Korea where they'll be accused of being spies. So instead they have to reach a country where they won't be deported, which is Thailand. When they arrive in Thailand, they must turn themselves in to the authorities to be transferred to that country. It can take them between 2 to 6 months to complete this escape, but the people who decide to do it prefer to take the risk rather than continue living in North Korea. Secrets the royal guards don't want you to know. They wear those long black hats to appear taller and more intimidating. If they have to go to the bathroom, they have to do it while standing there because they're not allowed to leave their position. They're allowed to move while on duty, but they're only allowed to take 15 steps every 10 minutes because standing in one place for too long is bad for their health. If you see them marching towards you, you better get out of the way because they'll either carry you away or yell, "Make way for the Queen's guards." Their weapons are usually empty unless there's a threat or an emergency. They're trained to feint in the right way so they don't make a ruckus, which is why if any of them feint, they'll feint forwards and onto their face. They're not allowed to smile or laugh, and if they do, they get $200 taken off their salary. That's why they always have a serious attitude even when tourists try to make them laugh. This 5-year-old girl disappeared every night until her father followed her to this house. It took 4 days for Tom, who's Annie's father, to realize that she wasn't in her room or in the backyard where she always played. When the girl finally showed up, he asked where she was, but she didn't say a word. On the 5th day, Tom decides to follow her without her noticing, but he loses sight of her. On the 6th day, he tries again and this time manages to follow her to her grandparents' abandoned house. He stayed hidden while he watched his daughter greet a female stranger. He then waits for his daughter to leave, then walks up to the stranger and questions her. She was an 80-year-old lady named Linda who ran away from her nursing home because she didn't want to live there. So she wandered the streets with dogs that she adopted until she met the girl who provided her with shelter and met her every day at the same time to give her food. Eventually, Annie's parents gave the house to Linda and later with the help of donations turned it into an animal shelter. Miracles people claim to have caught on tape. On Route 385 in Memphis, Tennessee, a driver lost control of his Jeep and went off the road. The car was immediately engulfed with flames. The driver escaped unharmed, but the curious thing is the police found a Bible that was untouched by the fire. It was perfectly fine even though the car was almost in ashes. In the Philippines, a little girl woke up at her funeral. Apparently she was ill and had a high fever which caused her to go into a coma. But the doctors didn't know that and declared her dead the day before her funeral. But luckily her relatives found out in time. Prahlad Jani was a Hindu ascetic who claimed he had an eaten or drank anything in over 70 years. Specialists in the scientific department put him in hospital for 15 days under 24-hour supervision and claimed he hadn't eaten or drank anything in those 15 days. According to the man, this can be achieved by meditation and a divine blessing. 5 people who beat the system, part 4. This guy had to send in a picture of him in a suit and tie to his work, but he doesn't own one, so he photoshopped his face on somebody else's. A mayor in Brazil prohibited bar owners from setting tables on the sidewalk, so their solution was to put them on the back of a truck. At a camp, all the kids had to write a letter home before they ate. So this kid just wrote, "I was forced to write this to eat." The students in this class had to pick a Marvel character, then write a resume and cover letter pretending to be them. So this student chose to do Groot, and since the only thing he says is "I am Groot," that's what he put for everything. Before I show you the smartest kid, I found an app that lets you prank your friends and family by changing their text messages. Just press the button on my profile to get it. This boy's mom put a lock on the drawer, so when he's misbehaving, she puts his electronics in it. But she never knew that the boy could take out the top drawer to get to the bottom one. This is a real scary McDonald's customer service story. A young girl who lived with her 3-year-old sister and her mother experienced a very frightening moment. One of her mother's cousins worked at a McDonald's near where they lived, so she often stays there after school while she waits for her mother to pick her up. One day while she was studying at McDonald's and taking care of her little sister who was playing in the playground, 2 strange-looking men walked in. One of them suddenly approached the girl and started asking her a bunch of questions, but she was really scared and didn't really answer them. A few minutes later, she looked out to see her sister, but she wasn't there. She quickly got up to look for her and realized that the other man was in the parking lot trying to get her sister into the car while she was kicking and screaming. The girl ran to her mom's cousin and told him to call 911, but the man who was taking her sister gave up when he saw several employees approaching him and left the girl on the ground. If she hadn't acted quickly, she may never have seen her sister again. He built a secret home in the corner of the mall and lived there for 4 years before being discovered. While Providence Place Mall was under construction, Michael Townsend, who's an American artist, was running around the site when he noticed a section that made no sense. It was an opening between 2 walls that led to a space too small to be a store and too angular to be part of the parking lot. But he continued on his run. 4 years later, him and his friends were forced to leave the place that they were living because it was going to be destroyed and replaced with a parking lot. Because of this, he got an idea and remembered the space that he had seen years ago. That's when him and his friends got to work and cleaned up the space. They decorated it and took electricity from the mall for a TV and video games. The only thing they didn't have is a bathroom, but they were caught 4 years later, and they all went to trial for trespassing and many other charges, but the judge made the decision to let them go on probation.